Welcome to Build Video 2. We're going to pick up right where we left off. We just put the landing gear on and now we're going to start to put the tail feathers in.
Here I'm getting ready to cut the rudder post with a Dremel tool cutoff wheel. This first cut's going to be much smaller than the elevator slot. I'll come back and clean it up with the tool here in a second. Now I'm going to take some thin CA and soak the raw wood that we just cut. Make sure on the bottom side, if you do this, to go back and clean out the hinge slot that's right underneath it on the bottom with a sharp X-Acto knife so that the hinge will go back into this slot. Here I'm getting ready to cut out the servo slots for the elevator and rudder servo. On the elevator side, which is this side, the left side, it's the forward servo slot. On the rudder side, which is the other side, it will be the aft servo slot. Now that I've got the servo holes cut out, I'm going to go back and put in some thin CA around the opening to make sure the doubler behind the servo is well soaked. Here I'm measuring the center of the elevator, measuring from inside the counterbalances, just the stab end. A normal ruler should be long enough to find the center. After you've found the center, you want to mark it with a straight edge and then go measure the slot inside the fuselage to see how wide the outside diameter is and mark the outside diameter on the elevator. These will give you some marks to realize whether the elevator is straight or not once you put it in the fuselage. Here we're cutting the elevator control horn slot. It is on the airplane left lower side or underneath side of the elevator. We're scuffing up the control horn. Notice it is the one short control horn in the kit. We'll put it in with medium CA on the control horn in the slot, followed by thin CA, clean it up with a paper towel like we've done for all the other control horns. Here we're getting ready to install the stab. We put the wing tube in as a reference. Now we're going to slide the elevator into the slot, look down through the back of the slot and make sure the line that you drew in there goes straight through the center of the fuselage. And also the reference marks that we put on the outside of it line up with the outside of the fuselage. I've also taped the elevator still so that it doesn't flop around and gets in the way. You're looking over the back of the elevator to make sure it lines up perfectly straight with the wing tube. In this case, it does. Tweak on it as much as necessary to make sure that it is exactly straight to your perfection. Once you've got it lined up, what we're going to do is hit one of the 4 joints with a little bit of CA just to tack it in place. We're going to use medium CA for this tack so it doesn't run completely into the joint. You're going to tilt the airplane a little bit so the gravity will draw the CA into the slot, and we're putting in very little glue at this point and only on one corner. Now we're pressing the rudder and the bottom of the fuselage together to kind of compress that joint on the elevator for a second. Keep looking over the stab to make sure everything is straight as this glue dries. Before it completely dries, we want to check and make sure that it is exactly straight and exactly how we want it. One of the things I like to do after looking at it from the back, flip it around, look from the front, and then also stand it on its nose and step back from it a few feet to make sure that it looks right. I found that all the measurements in the world sometimes won't make it look right, but if you can get it right with your eye and make it look good from 6 feet away, you're probably good to go. After you're positive that the elevator is straight and you're happy with it, we'll go back and hit all 4 joints with Thin CA. Notice after each joint, we compress the rudder and the bottom of the fuselage together to make sure that the joint is tight. After you get the hinges in the rudder, you want to make sure that the gap between the top of the fin and the top of the rudder counterbalance is good. Once it's good, just go ahead and glue in the hinges like we've done before on all the other control surfaces. One of the tricks you can do when working on the side of the airplane is to use the wing tube and the landing gear as a support. Push the wing tube halfway through and let it rest on that. It's a good stand to hold the airplane up while you're working on the side. Just want to talk about CA for a second. Medium CA doesn't run very much, so when you put it in the slot and put it on this control horn, you don't really have to worry about making a mess. But after this, you're going to go to Thin CA and start soaking the Thin CA into that joint. Thin CA will soak into just about anything, so you'll notice when you put it on here, it'll soak in immediately, and at some point it'll quit soaking in. If you keep gluing after it quits soaking in, you're going to make a mess and it'll run all over the airframe. Here we're getting ready to put the tail wheel assembly together and on the airplane. First thing I'm going to do is put the wheel collar on the tail wheel and mark it on the shaft like we did with the main axles so we know where to put a flat spot. After that, we're going to put blue Loctite on it and screw it down, and then go up to the control arms on the tail wheel itself and remove those so we can flat spot those as well. You'll definitely want to flat spot the upper and the lower. The upper is the one that actually steers the tail wheel, and if you don't flat spot that, at some point your tail wheel will be turning freely. You want to make sure that the tiller arm is lined up with the tail wheel so that when you put it on the rudder and the wheel are in the same position and rolling straight. After you've got the assembly built, you want to put it on the fuselage and pre-drill the holes. And again, I like to put a little CA on the screws before I put them in the fuselage. The first screw went in without any CA. I will go back and remove it and add CA to it. The most difficult one is the screw that holds in the tiller arm. I like to mark it with a pencil, drill it with a Dremel tool, put the tiller arm back in place, bend the tail wheel out of the way, and screw in the tiller arm screw with a little bit of CA on it. Another way to hold servo extensions together is to use heat shrink. This is normal heat shrink that I get from Lowe's. It works great for that. I like to pull on the servo extensions to straighten them out a little bit. That makes it easier to fish them through the fuselage. Again, we're using gravity to get it through the fuselage. I like to pull it out through the top opening of the fuselage and then use your forceps to go back and fish it through the little hole that Extreme Flight put in the fuselage to run them into the cabin. In the tail servos, you definitely want to pre-drill the holes. Another thing that you want to be careful of is when you're putting the screws back in the tail, not to push too hard. This is where having a good metric screwdriver that grips the head of the screws really well comes in handy. Notice that after I get the screw started, I'll support from the bottom of the aircraft to make sure that we're not pushing too hard on the elevator either. It pays to be very gentle when putting in the tail servos. Okay, we're going to build the elevator servo control arm. We're going to start with the G10 arm extensions that come in the kit. You're going to add the plastic servo arm that comes with your servo, and then you're going to drill 2 holes in the arm. The outermost hole and the innermost hole. You're going to insert the bolt and the washer and 2 nuts with blue Loctite into the G10 and plastic arm and screw them together. After you've screwed them together, clip off any excess arms and hit it with thin CA to bond the plastic arm to the G10 arm extension. Hit it with kicker. After you've hit it with kicker, cut off the bolts with the Dremel tool cutoff wheel so the bolts do not grind on the servo as they turn. Next step is to install the elevator control arm push rod. The push rod is going to go on the outside of the servo arm and the control horn. The bolt for the control horn end is going to come in from the outside with the nut on the inside. You'll need a pair of pliers or forceps like I'm using here to tighten that nut. Also notice I'm not putting in the servo screw at this time. I'll put that in after I've centered the servos and turned on the radio. But it is a good time to remove the masking tape from the elevator counterbalance so the elevator can move freely. The main difference on the rudder side is that I am not using the G10 servo arm extension. I have found with HS65s or Futaba 3156s that the standard arm that comes with them is plenty long enough to go stop to stop on the rudder. Please proceed to build video 3.